everybody. It's so good to see you again today for the Determining Decade webinar series. We are welcoming our guest, David Edelson, today. He's going to talk to us about forests, securing water, carbon, and wildlife habitat for the future. We care so much about our Sierra forests. They do so much for our wildlife and for our carbon sequestration, and offer many multiple benefits to California and the world. So we want to take care of them very carefully. And we're going to tell you about this in this webinar series, which we're calling the Determining Decade, which just underlines the importance of what we do in this next 10 years to put our planet on a healthy trajectory. So I was wondering, my name's Liz Harvey, first of all, and I'm the Chief Development Officer for the Nature Conservancy's California chapter. I've been here about 10 years, and I love the Nature Conservancy because I love the outdoors, and I just love enjoying the birds, the bees, running, biking, hiking, backpacking, etc. I just love being outside, and I'm sure that you do too. And so I was wondering if you remember this guy. He's Smokey the Bear, and I grew up with him, so I have the t-shirt. And he had an adage that you may remember. It started in 1944. It was an ad campaign. It was all about preventing forest fires. And the popular slogan was, "Only you can prevent forest fires." So that lasted actually 5 decades. And it was something that just got incorporated into my generation and future generations' minds that forest fires were bad. We needed to prevent them. And we've actually been suppressing forest fires in the Sierra and other parts of California for a lot longer than that. And the effect of that is that we've created a tinderbox in our forests. With the warming climate and with drought, it's just waiting to burn. And of course, many of us know we've had some terrible fires in the Sierra, not just associated with the recent drought that we went through, but also more recently than that. They harm wildlife, and more importantly, they harm people, and they harm where we live, and all the wonderful things the Sierra provides, including some really important economic support for our economy. So we welcome David. David is an expert in forests, and he's an expert in a lot of things, but forests is one of them. And he's been with the Conservancy for almost 10 years now. He's Associate Director of our Lands Program, and he's going to tell us how the Conservancy is, what we're doing to get our forests in a healthy way. So David, if I could turn it over to you, if you would explain a little bit about your background and why you're with the Nature Conservancy, and then just tell us about our program.
Sure, thank you, Liz. And as Liz said, my name's David Edelson, and I'm the Forest Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in California. I am an attorney by training, and I'm one of the fortunate attorneys who has been able to dedicate my career pretty much to things that matter deeply to me, and specifically nature and the Sierra Nevada. I spent the first half of my career as an attorney for groups like the Natural Resources Defense Council and Sierra Forest Legacy, and did some great work with partners to stop some bad things from happening, clear cutting, old growth logging. Along the way though, really learned that our forests would benefit from ecologically based forest management. And that's something that litigation is not so good at doing, getting good things to happen. And that's something the Nature Conservancy is good at. And that is a large part of what motivated me around 10 years ago to join TNC as the Forest Program Director. So what I'm gonna talk about today is our forests, and specifically forests of the Sierra Nevada. I think many of you are familiar with TNC, but for those of you who aren't, we're the world's largest conservation organization. We're working in 79 countries around the world and in all 50 states. And one of our great accomplishments is land protection, and one of the things we're best known for. We have helped to conserve around 120 million acres around the world. One of the things we've learned, though, is that protecting land is not enough. First of all, there's not enough money in the world to buy all the land that's important, but beyond that, There are issues like climate change, like drought, like wildfire that threaten the conservation values that we protect. So we have gradually shifted our focus. We're still doing a lot of land conservation in the Northern Sierra through groups like the Northern Sierra Partnership. But we're also, as an organization, taking on some of the big challenges that the world faces, things like climate change, things like ocean protection and forests. And we do that in a science-based way, in a bipartisan and nonpartisan way. And one of our strengths is we take a hands-on approach, a practical approach to solving problems. Because we own land, we work to manage that land and restore land. And through doing that, we learn about some of the broader problems that affect our forests and our planet. And we use our experience to help us to influence practice and policy more broadly. So as I mentioned, the focus of today is on forests in the Western United States and specifically the Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada is a land of superlatives. It's got the highest peak in the continental US, and it's got some amazing trees many of you may be familiar with. The giant sequoia, which is the largest tree on Earth and one of the largest living things on Earth. Jeffrey pine, which is an iconic species of the Eastern Sierra with thick bark that uniquely suit it to withstand fire. And the sugar pine, which is among the 100+ pine species in the world. The sugar pine is the tallest and most massive of all those pines. Sierra also has some really neat wildlife, species that inhabit old forests, things like the California spotted owl, which nests and rests in the dense canopy provided by big trees. The Pacific marten, which is a forest carnivore, which dens in cavities provided by large trees. And finally, the northern goshawk, which preys on birds and mammals using tall trees as a base to make its forays. So the Sierra forests are important not only for nature, but also for people. For example, Sierra forests provide 30% of California's above ground carbon, which is critical in mitigating climate change. Our forests are the source of 60% of California's developed water supply. And we're learning more and more over time how healthy forested watersheds are critical to our downstream water supply. And forests also provide really important values for people in terms of recreation and sustaining local jobs and economies. So I want to take a few minutes to explain what the issues are in our forests. This would be ideal to do with all of you out in the field. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do right now under COVID-19, but we do look forward when we are able to join some of you out in the field at our preserves to talk about forests. I think it's really the best way to learn. What this slide shows, this is an image from around 100 years ago, and of what our forests looked like before significant human intervention. And I'd ask you to notice a few things. First, the enormous, widely spaced trees. Second is the relatively open understory. And both of these were a result of frequent wildfires and intentionally set fires that were part of the way that these forests evolved. What science tells us is that our forests experienced fire every 10 to 15 years, relatively low severity fire. Some of it was lightning caused fire, but also the Native Americans intentionally set fire for food and for cultural reasons. And as a result, our forests co-evolved with frequent low severity fire. That fire served to provide ecological benefits, and it also served to clear the forest floor and the smaller trees so that when fire did occur, it generally would remain on the forest floor and serve a beneficial function rather than entering into the canopy where it can be very destructive. This image gives an idea of what our forests look like now. And by comparison to the last slide, what you'll notice is much more dense. The forests are much more dense, far more small trees, fewer large trees, and fewer openings in the forest. And one of the problems is that when fire occurs in these forests, as it inevitably will, it's much more likely to become a destructive fire. These forests have what we call surface and ladder fuels, and that means small material on the forest floor, small trees, which serve to carry fire from the floor of the forest up into the canopy. And once the fire enters the canopy, especially when there's high winds, it can become highly destructive, like this. And these kinds of megafires are not natural. They didn't occur naturally, and they are highly destructive, not for our forests, for our wildlife, for clean air, for clean water. Fires like this, which we are experiencing more and more, can cause long-term soil damage and can result in long-term and potentially permanent conversion of our forests to brushlands. So it's a real threat. It's a real challenge that if we don't face, we really risk losing a significant portion of our forests and all the values that those forests provide. And one example of a megafire that some of you may be familiar with is the Rim Fire, which burned in 2013. It burned nearly 250,000 acres in and around Yosemite National Park. It was an extraordinarily destructive fire. Estimates are that the ecosystem service values, that means things like clean air, clean water, carbon storage, the value lost was around $1 billion. $127 million were spent just fighting the fire. And the Rim Fire also released huge amounts of carbon, the equivalent of 3 million cars driving annually in California. And the image on the right shows the smoke from the Rim Fire, which was clearly visible from space. And this is really just one example. The problem is not fire itself, because actually, as I explained, the Sierra evolved with relatively frequent fire. The problem is that fires that are occurring now are more and more at high severity, and not only at small patches of an acre or two, but literally tens of thousands of acres are burning at high severity. So the science tells us that historically, high severity fire was only 10 or 15% of the total wildfire. And now in these fires like the Rim Fire and in the King Fire, which I'll also be mentioning, that proportion is getting much higher, and the high severity fire is burning huge patches of forest. So it's destroying wildlife habitat and causing really significant environmental damage. Now, the fortunate thing is that we can manage our forests to improve the conditions so they are more resilient to climate change, to wildfire, and to drought. And there's two basic tools that we use. One we call ecological thinning, and it's a kind of logging, paradoxically, since logging, through logging of old growth trees helped to create the conditions that we're in now. If you use logging as an ecological tool and you focus on removing the surface and ladder fuels, the smaller trees that are contributing to wildfire risk, we can improve forest conditions so that the forests more resemble those that we Europeans experienced, and that will be more resilient with climate change. And this is an example of before and after shot of the kind of ecological thinning that the Nature Conservancy is beginning to use, and that the Forest Service and others are also beginning to use. So the second tool, in addition to ecological thinning, is prescribed burning. And again, paradoxically, I've explained that fire can be a problem, but fire, this kind of prescribed fire, is also part of the solution. And using science, we can identify conditions, vegetative conditions, forest conditions, but also climate conditions where it's safe and appropriate to intentionally use fire in order to help clear the forest floor, return nutrients to the soil, and have ecological benefits. So these are the kinds of tools that we need to use, that we're beginning to use, but that need to be scaled up to a much more massive scale than we are doing right now. And that really, therein lies the challenge, and that is the focus of the Nature Conservancy's work, is how do we apply these tools appropriately when it's safe to do so in an ecological way to improve forest conditions throughout the Sierra Nevada. So these next images, in a way, just repeat what I've said, but they show through this graphic. On the left-hand slide, what you see is an overly dense forest where fire has been suppressed. And on the right-hand side, you see an example of what forest really looked like more pre-European settlement and what they might look like through ecological management. When fires occur in these different forests, the results are very different. In the overly dense forests, because of the surface and ladder fuels, all too often a fire will enter the canopy of the forest and burn and destroy many trees. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, what you see is a healthier forest where fire can stay on the ground or low in the forest and have mostly ecological benefits. And this can be the result. On the left-hand side, we can lose forests for the long term or even permanently. On the right-hand side, when fire is, when an ecologically managed or a healthy forest experiences fire, the forest remains as a forest. And although some of the smaller trees and brush may be killed, and even some of the larger trees, in general, the forest can remain a forest, and it can be resilient to these kinds of effects over the long term. I want to turn our attention now to talk about some of the demonstration sites where the Nature Conservancy is with partners. We are using ecological forestry and learning what works and what doesn't, with the goal of scaling up our work. And what the slide shows on the left-hand side is an area we call the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative. It's around 2.4 million acres. And there's 3 projects I'm going to briefly discuss located on the right-hand slide. One is our Independence Lake Preserve, the second, French Meadows, and finally, the North Yuba. And our goal here really is to scale up. And our work chronologically has started from the smallest project at Independence Lake, around 2,300 acres. The second project was French Meadows, an order of magnitude larger at 28,000 acres. We've now begun with partners this project we call North Yuba, another order of magnitude larger. And this is within the context of a science and planning effort called the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative, yet another order of magnitude bigger, with the goal ultimately of trying to improve forest conditions throughout California and the Sierra Nevada. I want to talk a bit about our Independence Lake Preserve. Some of you have visited the preserve, I hope. Unfortunately, right now it's closed to visitors because of COVID-19, but we're expecting and hoping that it will open up later in the year. It's a wonderful place to visit. You can bring your family, you can hike, there's other activities. And the Nature Conservancy acquired the land surrounding Independence Lake in 2009. And the reason we acquired it was because of this fish that you see on the lower right-hand slide, the Lahontan cutthroat trout. This is the only trout that is endemic or local to the Eastern Sierra in the area around Truckee. And unfortunately, with the introduction of other fish and trout, they have been able to outcompete the Lahontan cutthroat trout, or the LCT as we call it. And as a result, the Lahontan cutthroat trout is an endangered species. And Independence Lake is one of the very few native lake-based populations of Lahontan cutthroat trout remaining in the world. And that was our prime motivation for acquiring the preserve in 2009. And we've done some amazing work there to help restore the trout, including helping to extirpate or reduce the brown trout and other species that, kokanee, that compete with the Lahontan cutthroat trout. One of the things we learned after we acquired the preserve was that the condition of the forests surrounding the lake were unhealthy, and that the risk of a high severity fire in those forests also posed a significant risk to the Lahontan cutthroat trout. And the reason is that when high severity fires occur, often they lead to significant erosion, sediment, and debris entering into lakes and streams that are downstream of the fire. And that was a significant enough risk that we decided to try to reduce the risk and to improve forest management at the preserve. This slide gives an example of the kind of work that we have done and are doing at Independence Lake. On the left, you can see a machine in the background there. It's called a Feller Buncher. It's a machine that is very good at selectively thinning the small trees and brush that contribute to wildfire risk while maintaining the larger trees that are important ecologically. And we have thinned, I think, approximately 600 acres of the preserve using this and similar tools in the last several years. The other main tool that we have used and are continuing to use is prescribed burning. And this is an image of putting fire on the ground at the preserve. And the image on the right really shows how when you do use fire at the right time and in the right place, the fire, the length of the fire, what we call flame length, can remain at several feet at most. So these larger trees, although the fire is burning around them, will largely be able to survive because the large trees have thick bark, especially the Jeffrey pine, which I mentioned earlier, that helps them to withstand fire. And this video shows our forest ecologist, Ed Smith, helping put prescribed fire on the ground at Eye Lake. So I'll just pause and let you all watch this. Ed's a very happy forest ecologist. And this gives you a sense of what the forests look like after you've done the thinning and the burning. And you can see there's some big trees. We've created more space for the big trees to get really big, which is what we want. There's fewer small trees, less brush on the forest floor. And although I wouldn't necessarily say this is the desired condition, because it may take several interventions and time for the forest to develop the conditions we want, it's a big, big step in the right direction. So we began at Independence Lake. It's a preserve that the Nature Conservancy owns. We experimented with thinning and burning, but this is a problem. The problem of high severity fire and forest health is a problem affecting literally millions of acres of land in the Sierra Nevada and across the Western US. So it's not enough just for us to manage our own preserves. We need to find a way to work with partners to help improve management of forests throughout the Sierra. And in particular, that means the US Forest Service, because the Forest Service is a federal agency. It's the largest forest landowner in the Sierra Nevada and the largest, I think, probably in the Western US. And if we're going to succeed in reducing wildfire risk throughout the Sierra and the West, we need to find a way to work with the Forest Service and to help improve management of Forest Service land. So that led to our launching the French Meadows project. The project's around 28,000 acres. As with Independence Lake, and this is really one of the strengths, I think, of TNC, our work here began with an acquisition with land conservation. And in this case, in 2015, we helped the American River Conservancy, a local land trust, to purchase around 10,000 acres, which are shown in the checkerboard pattern, if you can make that out, in the center of the screen. And one of our goals in doing that was not only to conserve the land, but to help us launch a larger demonstration project where we could build on lessons learned at Independence Lake. One of the things this slide is showing is fire history in the vicinity of the French Meadows area. French Meadows is right in the center of the slide there in the boundary that's in the dark boundary. What you can see is that in the last 10 plus years, a number of fires have burned at high severity all around the project area, including at the bottom of the slide, you can see the King Fire, which burned in 2014. And a key goal here is to manage the French Meadows area to improve management so that if and when fire occurs, which most likely it will, it doesn't have the same kind of high severity impacts that some of these surrounding areas experienced. One of our key partners in this project is Placer County Water Agency, the local water utility, and Placer County. And their key interest is in trying to avoid the risk to water quality and to their facilities and infrastructure that are posed by high severity fire. This image very starkly shows the aftermath of the 2014 King Fire. This is further down in the watershed below French Meadows, but in the same watershed. And what it shows is the confluence of the Rubicon River and the Middle Fork of the American River, one of which was affected by the King Fire and experienced very significant sediment and debris loading into the stream. And as a result, you can see the brown color, and the other still running clear. So this is the kind of impact that Placer County Water Agency and Placer County wanted to try to prevent, and part of what motivated them to work with us and the Forest Service and other partners, including Sierra Nevada Conservancy, on this project. And those kind of impacts are important not only for a water utility, but also for nature. This is the imperiled foothill yellow-legged frog. And in the center image is a healthy egg mass. And these frogs require clean, cold water to be able to reproduce and to spawn and generate young. And what happens when you have impacts like the King Fire is that you have the sediment clouds and really can destroy these egg masses. And as a result, unable to, the eggs are unable to lead to healthy young. So it's a pretty serious problem. I want to just show you some images of the kind of ecological thinning work that we're beginning to do at French Meadows. This is a before and after shot. So you can see, as with the other images, really creating more space for the big trees, reducing the surface and ladder fuels, and creating a situation where we can again introduce healthy fire into this landscape. And to date, we have used thinning on around 1,000 acres. Last year was our first year of implementing the project. And over the next several years, the goal is to thin about 5,000 additional acres as part of the total project. We're also aiming to use prescribed fire very extensively at the preserve. And last year we prepared the area for prescribed fire. We haven't yet begun the burning. What this image shows is the building of fire lines. And fire lines are a tool that we use to help constrain the path of fire to make it safer to introduce fire. So we use tools, we hire crews, we use tools to build these lines. And then the image on the right, it's not from French Meadows, but it shows you how we then use those lines to help us impede the progress of the fire so that it doesn't expand in an undesired direction. And the fire line also allows people to come and use rakes and equipment to put fire out should fire begin to cross those lines. This is a cool image. It's showing what fire modeling is telling us about how our planned restoration of French Meadows will affect the length of flames should a fire occur. So there's very sophisticated models, and we hired state-of-the-art team to do this modeling. And what you're seeing within the project boundary on the left is before, and on the right is after being a model projection. And the dark red that you see is showing flame lengths of 20 to 50 feet or higher if a fire occurs, and that's before our management. And as I've explained, if you have flame lengths of 20 to 50 feet, very likely you're going to get significant burning of the canopy and potentially the kind of mega fire we're trying to avoid. And on the right-hand side shows what the modeling suggests will happen after treatment. Flame length is much more in the vicinity of 0 to 4 feet. And that's good. That's what we want. That's a kind of a good fire that is going to burn small trees and brush, the surface and ladder fuels, while mostly keeping the big trees, allowing them to survive. And we use this modeling as well to help design the project. So to help us figure out where the treatment should go, where prescribed burning made sense, and where the thinning made sense. So we learned some lessons from French Meadows. This is a cover of a report that you can find on our website, which I will direct you to. And one of the a couple of key lessons is, first, a partnership is a great way to accelerate the planning and restoration of forests. But more importantly, or just as importantly, I should say, we need to change how we do planning and analysis, and we need to work at even a larger scale to be more efficient. So one of the places we're doing that, and we're beginning to do that, is the North Yuba, which is indicated in green on the slide, the map on the left. This is a 275,000 acre project. It's just getting off the ground with partners, including the Forest Service, including Yuba Water Agency, Sierra County, local environmental groups, the Native Tribe, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and others. And we are really excited about taking on this big challenge of how do you manage an entire watershed to reduce the risk of high severity fire and promote healthier conditions. And this is an outstanding watershed. There's some of the best remaining old growth forests in the Sierra. There's also a number of communities that are places like Camptonville and others, Downeyville, that are embedded within this watershed where we're going to have to take great care to protect communities. And so it's a great challenge and a great opportunity, something that we're really trying to figure out right now. How do we plan and implement restoration at a large scale? One of the cool ways we can do this landscape planning is through this innovative approach. It's called LiDAR, and what it stands for is light imaging, light detection and ranging. And it's a remote sensing tool that you use a helicopter or an airplane. It sends these pulses of light to the ground, and it allows us to map at a very fine scale what the forest conditions are on the ground. So it allows us to identify, using this remote sensing, the size of trees, the density of trees, where there are gaps in the forest. And a huge advantage of this is that we don't have to literally walk every acre in order to design a restoration prescription. We can use this remote sensing combined with some ground truthing in order to much more efficiently plan and implement kind of restoration projects that we want to do. So our goal here, as I mentioned earlier, is to scale up from Independence Lake, French Meadows, North Yuba. This Tahoe Central Sierra initiative, where TNC is co-leading a planning effort, would be at 2.4 million acres. And there we're using the LiDAR approach as well as other innovative tools in order to plan at a landscape scale. And ultimately our goal is to try to improve the health of really the forest throughout the Sierra Nevada. So I focused on how we're using demonstration projects, and that's a key part of our strategy, but I want to just briefly highlight some of the other important things we're doing in order to accelerate the pace and scale of forest restoration. One important approach involves funding, and you might wonder, this work is expensive to do. The thinning sometimes will pay for itself, but often it won't, because we're focusing on smaller trees that have less economic value. Prescribed fire can cost from $500 up per acre. So it's really critical that we increase public and private funding to do this work. And the Conservancy has been very successful so far. We helped to secure $1 billion 5-year commitment from the state of California to invest in our forests. We helped to pass bipartisan legislation through Congress that improves how the Forest Service budgets wildfire fighting, and that's going to free up hundreds of millions of dollars for better forest management. And we've also, through quantifying some of the benefits of forest management and forest restoration, particularly in terms of water quality, we've been able to secure millions of dollars investments in upper forest watersheds from water utilities and beverage companies who really see the benefits to them of investing in the watersheds. And finally, I'll mention a bond measure that TNC and others have been working on. We have been aiming for the November ballot. The COVID-19 situation, I think, is now at least causing us to reconsider and potentially reshape that measure. But if that goes forward, our hope is that it too will include literally hundreds of millions of dollars for the kind of forest work that we want to do. We also work to change the narrative. I mentioned earlier, I think there's still some have the prevailing view that all logging is bad and that all fire is bad. And so we're working through this science publication that we've done to try to shift that narrative. And also through an innovative media campaign that we developed and have implemented called Let's Stop Making History. And we've used some really neat approaches there, very targeted paid media, including social media. So we've used Google ads, we've used Twitter, we've done some paid advertising on Politico and Facebook, and we have the ability to track what's working and what isn't. And so we tried a bunch of approaches, then we fine-tune our approach to on the ones that were working most and that were getting the highest response. And one key goal of that was to point the public and policymakers to our website, which I encourage all of you to check out as well, which has more information about our strategies and our approach, because obviously those paid ads are very small. They can only have very brief messages. And so this is, so we direct people to the website for more information. I've mentioned partnership, and I really can't emphasize enough how important it is that the Conservancy is working with others to do this work. We're working with federal government, with the state government, with water utilities, with the timber industry, with environmental organizations, and many others. This is a big problem we're facing. It's an all hands on deck situation. We can't do it alone, and we've been fortunate to have some great partners to work with on these projects. Coming back to the theme that Liz mentioned, this is the determining decade for our forests. The next 10 years are really going to be critical for the trajectory of our forests and our planet. The choices we make now are going to help determine whether we have forests for the future and what our planet looks like in the long term. So I want to leave you with a few key takeaways. The first is that the Sierras forests and Western forests more generally are at significant risk from megafires, drought, and climate change. The second is that TNC is really making a difference, and we're doing it through the demonstration projects I mentioned, using state-of-the-art science, the innovative marketing, effective advocacy, and through partnership. And finally, I want to really invite all of you to join us. And we've appreciated so much the support from many of you for our work through the Sierra Forest and Water Challenge and other venues. This is work that we literally can't do without you. So really want to invite you to join us. And with that, I will turn it over to Liz.
Thank you, David. It's been so great to be here with you. David's just been a long-time workmate with me, and we've been up to the Sierra many a time to look at trees and kayak on lakes and things like that. So it's great to see you via the web. But I just want to thank you so much for being with us. And again, have a great day, and thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.